Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And once again, we have Tarang Gupta with us. And for those of you who have joined here for the first time, I urge you to go back and listen to the first part of our conversation with Tarang. Primarily, he talks about his journey, which would be very useful for this conversation for you to understand where he is coming from. But at the same time, it's very interesting profile that he's got. So you would want to miss that. So with that, and for the rest of you, I hope you're enjoying Future Path, and thank you so much for supporting our efforts and also spreading the word around. And for those of you who have not yet subscribed, please do click the subscription button right away. So once again, Tarang, welcome to Future Path.
Thank you, Nanchunda. Thank you for having and inspired by what you're doing. So happy to be sharing my journey, but also my experiences.
Right. Tarang, but most often, which is so true with the successful people and leaders, is that they tend to get into a loop. It has worked here, it has worked there, and subconsciously do the same thing everywhere because it's been a success, but which won't work, right? Because dynamics are so fast changing, and particularly for people like you who work in different geographies and with different people from different geographies again. How do you work on yourself? How do you work with yourself to break that kind of a loop so that you don't get into?
So, okay, it's natural, right? And I call it as proven success affinity. It's natural to believe that something that has worked in the past could work in the future, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think, and I'll say it with humility, I try being conscious of it. Still not successful every time that you do it, because we also believe that sometimes our own ideas are better or they could work. The best way to do that is, and I follow, and I'll tell you what I follow. I follow a 1 week window. I raise a question with my ambition and vision. So example, if I go back to the team and say, how do we get there? How much time do you need? Can we look at everything possible, as crazy as possible to as conservative to get there? And what does it mean and how can I help you? So I create the yardstick of saying, where do we want to go? And I back off. Because I've also done sometimes mistakes of walking into one of my director's rooms and say, hey, I think, why don't we do this? And then I walk out of the room and say, shit, why did I do that? Why do I want to do this? Why do I want to do this? Because to get there. So, hey, then just talk about get there. As a leader, I want us to get there. How do we do it? Then the moment things come in, that's when then the experience of, as a leader with a few more years of experience, but collective experience, then starts evaluating it based on different parameters. So I try holding myself, I would say I'm 60% there, 40% I still go into and say, let's do this. So it's being conscious about it. And that's why we say it's a lifelong learning journey to be a leader.
And you also mentioned that, about how the technology is disrupting things. So how do you see your industry, the FMCG that you're in, and how do you see that is getting ready for the kind of uncertain future that we are getting into? Particularly, technology is changing so significantly. So what are the challenges and opportunities and for you, your FMCG business?
Look, technology is one of the best blessings that we can get as an industry. The fear is Are we going to be fast enough to adopt it or somebody else will? Now, let me explain where all are we looking at, and maybe all my peers and the other FMCG industry companies are also looking at. First is disruption in the distribution model. So let me take a step back and explain what is the core of any FMCG industry. The core of any FMCG industry is penetration. Now, penetration means how many houses, how many times are they using it? That's as simple as that, because it's a fast moving. So the more houses, more number of times. That's a simple thing. For that, you need to be available in a store, and you need to be available in the mind of the shopper. Only then. That's as simple as this business is all about. So now let's look at technology disruption, availability. Now, availability, there was a time we were talking about, and including happened in India, and I was at least I ran modern trade business in early part of my career, and that modern trade used to be new channel defined in early 2000. Right. Today, I'm seeing in multiple markets, the markets are jumping off modern trade. The large hyper super models, which we thought will be taking 40–50% of the market, are slowing down rapidly. And the general trade market is relatively secure. The mini and the smaller formats have become far more rampant. And then comes the technology, which is trying to connect the dots. How is it? What we thought as a customer, which is your small retailer, is your customer, is now becoming your sub-customer, because he's becoming a customer of your larger customer. Do I have now the data of this guy? No. How can technology help? So connecting those dots. The second thing that's happening is we keep talking about e-commerce, but take e-commerce to a socio-commerce and now put AI onto it. So mental availability, which is in the minds of the consumers, how do we leverage AI to understand what's exactly happening? Because in our industry, the amount of data that we get from e-commerce is still very small.
We continue to record.
I'll talk about the technology part. So when I'll to your question that you raised, Anjunda, about how will technology. So our industry is very simple. It's all about penetration, which means distribution and mental availability. Now in distribution, the disruption is happening with multiple models. There are strong traditional models. Then you have the hyper models. Then you have the e-commerce. Connecting those dots and creating the most efficient way of reaching is where the technology is playing a role. But also, that linking back to how shoppers are buying is where, how do you put AI onto it? In our industry, the level of data that we have with respect to social commerce is still much smaller for us to create larger platforms, but that's where the opportunity will be in terms of how do you connect AI of mental availability, linking it back to physical availability and actual purchase, because that happens only on selected e-commerce or social commerce platforms. But that's overall, if you take the FMCG, it is still only 5 to 7% of the industry across the world. I mean, other than the developed markets, it's about 20%. It's still very small. Right. But at the end of it, this loop, till the time this loop is not completed, in reality, there is enough wastage. There is enough wastage. What you're communicating or advertising, whatever the organization is spending in terms of commercial, is it translating back? It comes through the lag indicators, but it does not come back to the lead indicators. And that's the journey that FMCG is more and more going into. And that's where the technology and AI is going to start playing a role.
How do you see a role of people like you as leaders? How do you balance it from a point of making decisions driven by data and with AI coming in? And you're compelled to use, I mean, it is necessary also and it is useful, but at the same time, you carry your own rich experience of having handled things. So how do you see this handled by you as a leader, and what do you think the challenges of a leader in this aspect?
Look, I'll be honest about it. So far, I haven't come across something that has shaken me off that That's something that's paranormal that I need to look at it. However, on a day-to-day basis, the principle is very simple. The data doesn't lie. The decisions can have different perspectives. So where we are, more and more data is coming in. How do you use it from a predictive point of view and actions? That's where then we start putting in scenarios. What we are doing right now is, it's very simple. The more we are getting in, the more we are doing, the more we are generating our own knowledge sphere. And that's how it goes in. So as an industry, or at least I can say that my organization as well is in the cusp mode. It's the old versus the AI, the new, the data. It's a blend world right now. It's a blend world, that's fine. So it's okay, but more and more keep swinging to the right, putting in more data in, making decisions based on it, evaluating it back, putting more data back in. And that's how then the knowledge of an organization creates, and you start creating your own history.
See, I don't know if you heard about it. Last year, a gaming company, fairly large gaming company, total value is upwards of $10 billion in China. They have a rotation CEO policy, and they had AI play the role of a CEO. Of course, it was an experiment. I don't have the data. There was no report about the efforts of AI CEO versus the other rotation CEO in terms of their comparison as such. But given that, how do you see the challenges of a leader in from a point of handling these decisions? Because obviously, if the data doesn't lie, which is a fact, but at the same time, our previous conversation off the record, what we're talking about from a point of wisdom to data. So how do you see these challenges as a leader?
Look, I know I read about that as well, what you're referring back to. See, leaders of today have to unlearn faster than they learn. That's, I think, the starting point. Because we are being thrown. Take organizations, the more and more the Gen Zs and the millennials are coming in, they are coming in with their perspective, technology, data, ways of doing business. At the other end, you have data coming in, more and more data and AI is bringing in. And then you have your external volatility. The world is, we say that from a VUCA point of view, the world is going to go through VUCA the cycle of VUCA is now 6 months to 9 months to a 12 months generation, which used to be decades in the past. So volatility outside, flesh blood inside, which is challenging the status quo and doing things, data and AI is throwing it. So as leaders, you'll have to start to unlearn first, continuously unlearn. And thus, the only way you can do that unlearning is stick with where do you want to go. The role of the leader is, and I still believe, my personal belief, role of the leader is only 2 areas. Ensure the compass is moving in the right direction. Leaders have to unlearn, because the past is not going to define the future. And that's why it's called as future fast, because it's changing very fast. So there are only 2 things. One, at a personal level, the leader has to unlearn, which means what worked in the past not necessarily will work in the future, has to accept it. And that's where the power of the leader comes in. Second is create experimentation. So, because sometimes if the risks are too high, create modules of experimentation within the organization. And our industry is the oldest industry on the planet, if I may say. So it's so important that, so thus we are still very, very dependent in many ways, working the traditional and adopting the new way of working, create experimentations. And that's what creates proof of success, which gives trust to the organization. And the third is flush the organization with more and more millennials, because that's where the future will be. They will adopt, but don't lose the wisdom. One of the biggest fears that I have personally, Nanjunda, is that because the world is changing so fast, are we able to retain the knowledge? And knowledge in the form of wisdom. And that will be the challenge of the future. Knowledge of wisdom will be, I mean, experience has a role to play. So retaining that knowledge and collective knowledge of an organization becomes very important. And that is where I think the future will make a difference. Because if you lose that collective knowledge, it will be a constant experimentation world.
Well, interesting that you say this. I've had opportunity to talk to few futurists more coming from transhumanist background. So you're familiar with transhumanists, right? They're talking about extending the life to even up to 1,000 years. And also very interesting conversation I had with another gentleman who is one of the leaders in the longevity space. So Aubrey de Grey. So he was talking about his effort is not from a point of transhumanism, but he does believe in defeating diseases, not defeating death. So talking about again extension of life. So how do you see, and as such the West and as such our whole lifespan is increasing everywhere. So most times in India people refer to India being a young country because we have 50% of the population below 35. But what most people forget is that we have nearly 17% of the people above 65, which is possibly almost equal to an American population of 65 plus. So from the context of what you're saying is how do we retain their wisdom, but it's huge population and who we regard as retired. So how do you see this balancing out?
Look, I think it's there. I mean, from a business point of view and my industry point of view, it's great because the more the mouths, and the more the warm bodies, more the business for us. So it's very clear. But from leadership point of view, and I'm a mid-40s leader. I've been a CEO for about 6 years now, 7 years. I realized that what I was as a leader when I first became a CEO was I was there to prove, to drive, to change. Today, I'm here to learn. And the moment the mindset becomes to learn, you are learning from the young, fresh, but you're also learning from the experience. There is the old science which said that if you do something for 21 times, it becomes part of your muscle brain memory. It's the same thing. There are leaders who have done it 21,000 times. And they exactly know it. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. There was an experiment done somewhere. There was a mechanic who was there, and then there was this, I don't want to name the brand, and their AI system. The mechanic saw it, switched on the car. It was a car or was it something? I think it was a car. Switched on the car, and he exactly knew what the issue was because he is dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. Why do we say that if you go to a doctor in a government hospital, especially in developing and emerging countries, they are far more proficient? So we should not lose as we are getting into the startup world, there is very strong element of data, rigor, experimentation, but there's also an element of experience. And the more we bring it through, we are lucky at this moment of time, we have the two worlds coexisting, but in 10 years, it will not. And thus retaining this knowledge of these people and their experience is. So what I do personally is I have mentors and I don't follow one mentor. I have different types of mentors, people who have retired about 10 years back, and it could be a very different conversation, including my father, who's a very, very senior executive. And he's 84, 83. But if I ask him a question, he asks me a question back, and 3 questions of his gives me the answer. Now, that's experience.
Well, Tarang, thank you so much. This was very interesting, and I'm sure the insights you have shared about leadership is found as interesting as I have done, and also useful for all our audience and listeners. And with that, thank you once again for your time, and really appreciate it. And for the audience and listeners, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And you know what to do? Go ahead, share it with the people. These have been some excellent leadership insights, and I'm sure it's been uh, very interesting to listen to, and most importantly, also for you to perhaps go back and listen to once again and see what are the things that you could look at considering in the way you're running your own business or your work. All right, thank you. And yes, before we say goodbye, don't forget to subscribe to Future Fast, and also not don't forget to share it with those who appreciate it. Thank you once again. Take care and enjoy the ride.